Hello, friends. Tonight I will show you a night in a house where one empty chair is the only witness. The living room holds a quiet light and an empty chair that seems to listen. The documentary crew lingers at the threshold, seconds counting down to a confession. Watch closely. Night pressed silver against the windows as Noah stepped into the living room. The documentary crew lingering at the threshold like nervous shadows. The house wore the quiet of a sleep that forgot to check in with itself. A lamp hummed, throwing a halo of pale gold across the table where an empty chair waited as if it were listening. Grace appeared in the doorway first, a kettle's sigh escaping as she set it on the stove with careful ritual. She offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Tea? It's late for decisions, isn't it, Noah? Liam followed, a sleeve of his shirt catching on a hook as if the room itself was trying to tether him to the moment. He lifted his jaw in greeting, then lowered it. The contact brief and practiced. We're not starting a war, if that's what you're after. Mira stood at the kitchen threshold, arms folded, listening with the composed patience of someone used to hearing but rarely being heard. Her eyes flicked from Noah to Grace, then to the vacant chair, the unspoken weight of it settling into the air like a drawn breath. Noah frames the scene with the precise distance of a lens, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. The camera light catching the edge of the empty chair, a beacon and a verdict at once. I'm not here to unearth a spectacle. I'm here to begin with honesty, with consent, with care. The words feel rehearsed, and he lets the sentence hang, a small pause between the syllables. Grace's fingers brush the chair's back as if testing its surface for warmth. Honesty starts where defenses fall away, she says softly, almost to the chair, as if the chair might answer. She keeps her gaze on Noah, the tremor in her voice barely contained. Liam's mouth tightens. Pain isn't a prop, he says, quieter than his usual reserve, but no less firm. If you want to tell a story, tell ours. But don't pretend we're listening when we're curling into ourselves to avoid the hurt. Mira steps forward, the line at her mouth softening. We've learned to speak in fragments, she admits, to guard what could shatter. If you're patient, maybe we'll find a way to say more than the weather. The conflict crystallizes in a breath. Noah's impulse to begin filming, the family's impulse to hold back. The dominant feeling is cautious restraint, a wall built of shared habits and unspoken pasts. Yet a small crack works its way through. Grace's knuckles loosen, the kettle's whistle puncturing the silence. Mira's shoulders dropping a fraction, Liam's jaw releasing the tension he didn't know he was carrying. The symbol reappears with quiet naturalness. The empty chair, not a monument, but a doorway. Grace glances at it again, then meets Noah's gaze with averted eyes that linger there just long enough to invite a choice. If you're honest here, you must be okay with not knowing how it ends, she says, almost to herself. Noah speaks softly, not to demand, but to invite. Then we begin with what is safe to tell and what is safe to hear. No sensational angles, just lines between us that we're willing to redraw. He shifts the camera slightly, a gesture of consent for everyone in the room to decide how the frame will hold them. The room breathes. The clock ticks, an old patient sound that seems to measure not time, but trust. A hand meets the back of the empty chair as if someone unseen could slip into it at any moment. And the gesture makes the room pause. Mira's voice is the first to drift toward the possibility of more. Maybe we start with listening, really listening, and see where that leads us. The room quiets, not into silence, but into a willing stillness that feels like a doorway opening. The question hangs in the air. unresolved and important. Can confession begin a healing that keeps love intact? Or will it fracture what we already pretend to protect? The crew waits, the family waits, and Noah, the observer, waits for the moment when openness feels like a choice rather than a risk. The scene doesn't solve it, it invites it. And as the camera glides toward the empty chair, the weight of the decision lingers, a question that refuses to be answered tonight. Late afternoon light spills across the kitchen, a pale rectangle on the tile. The camera sits on the counter, a quiet third presence. Grace by the sink, Liam near the fridge, Mira at the island with folded hands. The only sound is the clock's careful ticking and the soft hiss of the kettle cooling. An unopened letter nestles in a drawer, a pale envelope that hasn't aged into rumor, just a possible truth waiting behind a crease. Noah stands at the threshold, not moving the frame, but letting the room tilt toward honesty. He doesn't push. He listens with the keen patience of someone who knows a boundary is a form of care. Grace finally shifts, the motion small but unmistakable. "We told ourselves we'd keep the image intact," she says, almost to the counter, not to any particular listener. That's what this kitchen perfected, the calm, the routine. But the quiet has its own weight. Liam's jaw tightens. "We've built a house on apologies we never named," he says, softer than his voice has ever allowed. "I've learned to live with the weight rather than the truth." Mira's eyes lift, bright with wary courage. "What if speaking hurts more than it helps?" she asks, not pleading, just naming the tension that is threaded through years. The letter in the drawer seems to glow faintly, as if it's listening too. Grace's hand hovers, then drops to her side. The drawer remains shut. "There was a night," she begins, choosing a softer road than raw accusation, "when I convinced myself that the pain would burn away if we simply didn't talk about it. I told myself we could keep loving by keeping the door closed." Noah's breath catches, a careful tilt of his head. "That choice kept the family together, Grace. But did it keep the truth from breaking you all apart later?" Mira leans forward, a tremor in her voice. "If we keep pretending nothing happened, we'll keep pretending we're all okay. I'm tired of pretending." A long pause, the kind that feels like a held breath before a shoreline breaks. The dominant impulse in the room shifts. From protecting the image to choosing a moment of truth that can still hold them. Grace's eyes soften, not with surrender, but with a fragile resolve. "I won't pretend any longer that I didn't carry some of the blame for not speaking when it mattered." Liam allows a small, almost invisible nod, a ripple in the surface of a wary sea. Mira exhaled, the tension easing into something like connection. Noah steps closer, not closer to them, but closer to what they might become. "If we name the choice we've made, that we'll speak when everyone can listen, then perhaps we've found a boundary that protects love as we test its edges." The letter's envelope remains unopened, resting unseen in the drawer's shadow. The question lingers in the air, unanswered, suspended like a thread. Can this family belong to the truth without fracturing the ties that keep them together? Mira sits squarely in the chair, hands folded in her lap, the wall clock ticking softly. The camera is close, the lens catching the tremor in her lower lip, the mic on the frame a steady, small witness. "Mira, I've learned to speak in whispers, almost to disappear between words. I'm careful with my breath, with the way I tilt my head when I talk about how I feel, so nobody has to notice the tremor behind it." She looks at the microphone, as if it might answer for her. "Mira, when you're little and you raise your hand, you're sure someone will call your name. And then you hear the room go quiet. Or worse, you hear the answer you already know. That your question isn't the one that matters. That you're just the background noise the adults tune out to keep the story moving. A pause sits between her words, the room listening. The clock ticks a second time, a reminder of time slipping through fingers. Mira, I've learned to survive the silence by pretending I'm not speaking at all. But pretending doesn't solve the ache, does it? The ache that wants to be seen, not just seen through somebody else's lens, not as a side note in someone else's memory. She shifts, a careful openness. The frame catches the faint red flush on her cheeks. She's teaching herself to open a door she's long kept closed. Mira, sometimes I feel like I'm speaking a language nobody else wants to learn. And when I push a little, when I say, no, this is important to me too, it's not a roar. It's a question, a whisper that waits. Will you listen long enough to hear what I'm trying to tell you? Or will you keep turning the page to the next scene? The hint of a tremor returns to her voice. Not a collapse, but a choice. Mira, I want to matter in this room. Not as the echo of someone else's pain, not as the girl who knows how to be quiet. I want my needs on the table, seen, named, and weathered with care. I don't want to break something. I want us to listen so we can heal what's been broken anyway. Her eyes search the air, then settle on a point beyond the camera, as if listening to a distant truth. The frame tightens on the microphone, a symbol of what has not yet been spoken. The room remains still, the air thick with what remains unsaid. Mira, can I say what I need without tearing us apart? Can saying my name aloud become a bridge instead of a fault line? The question lingers, unanswerable in that moment, as if the room itself holds its breath alongside her. The clock continues its quiet counting, and the camera holds, and the microphone waits. The kitchen holds its breath as dusk folds over the town. The small documentary crew has learned to stay out of the way during these breaths. Yet the room feels watched all the same. The clock in the living room ticking like a metronome for unspoken confessions. Grace sits with a mug that's gone cold, the chair beneath her limbs exacting a stubborn stillness. A drawer against the wall carries its own secret, the kind that doesn't shout so much as wait. An unopened letter tucked inside, edge of paper catching the lamplight the way a promise might. Grace's voice comes soft, almost unfamiliar to herself. I've spent years trying to be the image of us. The calm, the safe house, the untroubled surface. She looks at the mug as if it could confirm her truth by the echo of its steam. I thought if we looked steady, we wouldn't risk breaking. Her hands unclasp, fold, unclasp again. The dominant choice is clear in the tilt of her jaw. She will name what she has guarded. Liam appears in the doorway, a silhouette of memory and caution, but he doesn't cross the threshold. He only leans there, listening, a border to Grace's honesty. The room tightens around them. Mira sits at the kitchen table's far edge, her eyes bright with a mix of worry and resolve. Grace's next breath seems to pull a thread through years of quiet. Keeping the calm image came at a cost. Someone's closeness, someone's chance to be seen. The words fall like a measured knocking. The unopened letter in the drawer catches a bit more light, and Grace nods toward it, as if naming the letter aloud might unlock something. That letter never opened itself, did it? I kept it closed so we wouldn't have to choose between me being the grown-up and us being okay. A pause. The ticking clock marks time not as mercy, but as obligation. Mira's gaze travels from Grace to the drawer, then returns, searching for a path through years of unsaid things. Liam shifts. the tension between letting truth slip and guarding what remains. Grace looks at the unopened letter again, and something in her softens, the stubborn shield around her dissolving, not collapsing, but letting light through. If we're going to stay together, she says more to herself than to them, I owe you the truth that lives beside the fear. Her voice catches, a tremor that seems to travel from her chest to the edge of the table and back. Not every truth has to be a reckoning. Some truths can be a doorway. The camera's lens, still respectful, catches the moment where silence stretches into something fragile, almost collaborative. The letter remains unopened, its fate suspended in the room's quiet accord. Grace rests her palms flat on the table, warmth returning to her fingers as she looks up at her children and then at Noah, as if inviting a collective breath. We've spent so long pretending we're okay with the distance, she continues, a careful, hopeful confession. If we lean toward honesty, it might hurt. It might rebalance what we've built on appearances. But I'd rather risk that than watch us drift apart because we never spoke what mattered. The room shifts, not with a dramatic reveal, but with a small, shared hinge. Liam meets Grace's eyes for the first time in years, with something akin to tentative faith. Mira inhales as if to claim a place in the room she's long reserved for others' voices. The unread letter stays shadowed in the drawer, a quiet emblem of what could be faced or left alone or faced together. Noah lowers his lens slightly, not to erase, but to witness the moment Grace names the price of the mask she wore. The scene doesn't resolve in a single pronouncement, but it moves now toward a different center of gravity. The family choosing to listen, to let truth become a verb they can claim together. The air holds a question longer than the breath it cost. Can Grace open the truth without destroying the family? The editing room is a small, bright cave, the house soft with night outside. The monitor glows with Grace's confession. Not a scream, but a tremor that travels through the room and settles in Noah's ribs. He watches as his own questions hover above the footage, a careful line drawing the truth around everyone's shoulders. He notices how the frame itself can be a second narrator, how the cut can tell a story that the speakers cannot. A switch on the editing console catches his eye. A circular pause button, innocent in red and black, almost patient. He presses it, and the room goes still. The hum of the cameras thins. The voices that just spoke linger, as if on a breath held too long. He senses the conflict. To push ahead and claim a precise, marketable truth, or to pull back and permit a slower, riskier honesty to take root. The dominant choice sits there, heavy as a stone in his palm. What if I hold the lens here and wait for you to name what you need? He murmurs, not to Grace on the screen, but to the empty chair opposite him, as if she might answer from the room's quiet corners. The emotion shifts, from observer's weight to a cautious, almost surgical responsibility. He recalls the rule: consent to edit, boundaries respected. He rubs at the tension in his neck and drafts a new intention in his head. Not a single controlling cut, but a shared cut, a map drawn with the family. The crew watches, breath held, as Noah invites them into a moment of co-authorship, even if only for a breath. He leans toward Grace's confession, framing it not as puncturing a wound, but as offering a doorway. The pause button remains in sight, a small, stubborn emblem of choice rather than defeat. Let's tell this together, he finally says, almost to the room, almost to Grace, almost to the future. The air between the monitor and the desk grows warmer, more possible. But the question lingers, unspoken and unanswerable. Can he edit truth without undoing trust? Or will the film, to be honest, need its own next pause? The dining room wore the hush of a tide-washed evening. Salt silver light pooled on the table, the air tasting faintly of damp wool and old photographs. An empty chair faced Mira, its wood pale as a witness, as if the room were still waiting for someone to sit and say the thing that never happened. Liam stood by the doorway, shoulders squared, then softened. He'd rehearsed a dozen lines in the kitchen, none of them fitting the moment now. The camera's presence, whether real or remembered, felt like a subtle intrusion he'd promised to respect. He stepped in, hands in his pockets, the chair opposite Mira, a small, patient indictment. "I missed it," he began, almost to the chair, almost to himself. "That day, I missed the moment to ask you what you needed from me back then. I told myself I'd protect you by staying quiet, but I was protecting something else. The silence that makes a family look okay, even when it isn't." Mira folded her arms. Her gaze did not lift from the plate in front of her. The room held its breath, the clock ticking a quiet metronome against the wall. The sound emphasized the distance between the words he wanted and the words he feared. "Dad," she said finally, not unkindly, "I needed you to see me. Not just the room that holds your memories of us. Not just the version where everything gets tucked away so neatly that no one trips over a wound." He winced at the phrase, then steadied himself. "I see that now. And I'm sorry for not seeing it then. I'm not asking you to forgive. Only to tell me if you're willing to tell me when you're ready." He offered the empty chair a tentative glance, as if asking it to bear witness to what he could not yet say aloud. Mira shifted. The chair between them, a weathered metaphor, become a real, stubborn boundary. "People on the crew aren't the problem," she said, softening without surrendering. "It's the moment you walk past that you don't call back. It's the voices you hear and decide aren't worth listening to." "Then let me listen," Liam replied, the words roughened by reluctance and resolve. "Not tonight as a performance, not for someone else's cut, but for you. If you want to choose the time, I'll wait. I'll wait as long as you need." Her eyes flicked to the clock, to the empty chair, to the window where the sea kept its own counsel. A small sigh gathered in her chest, the first, and she looked back at him with a guarded clarity that felt almost like mercy. "Maybe we start with a question you'll actually answer," she said. "Not a promise that I'll be heard, but a plan. A moment when you're ready to hear me, and I'm ready to speak in a way that doesn't collapse us." Liam swallowed. The weight of what he hadn't asked, or hadn't heard, suddenly pressed on him as if the room itself leaned forward. He nodded, slow and careful, the empty chair still there, a tangible reminder that the conversation would be chosen, not imposed. "On your terms," he said, almost a whisper. "You name the time, and I'll be there with questions that don't hurt us more than we already are. I won't rush you. I won't fix you. I'll listen." The air shifted, not with fireworks, but with a quiet, stubborn resolve. The chair remained empty, yet not powerless. It stood as a prompt that choice could still turn toward healing, if everyone involved could share the space honestly. Mira finally met his gaze. A thread of openness loosened in her eyes, but she did not promise. She did not retreat either. "Then we start with listening," she said, barely more than a breath. The room slowed to a new rhythm. The ticking clock, the soft lapping of distant waves, their breaths thinning into a cautious harmony. The question hung between them, true and unresolved. Can Liam choose this path without unraveling the fragile thread Mira needs to hold on to? Evening settled over the kitchen like a soft, careful breath. A lamp shed a narrow rectangle of light across the table, where a battered laptop glowed with a pale timeline. A quiet revolved around the room. The creak of the floorboards, the tick of a wall clock, the hiss of the fridge. In the middle, a glossy black pause button sat next to a stack of sticky notes, as if waiting for permission to halt a life. Noah watched Grace, Liam, and Mira circle the table with wary calm. He hadn't pressed the button yet, not even a click. He felt the weight of their faces, the way guilt wore Grace like a shawl, the way Liam's mouth froze before a truth, the way Mira's eyes kept searching for a boundary that wouldn't break her. Grace spoke first, soft but not unaware of the room's gravity. We owe ourselves a pause, not for vanity, but for responsibility. If we're going to tell a truth, we tell it on terms that don't erase us. Liam shifted, hands steady on the edge of the table. I'm not afraid of honesty. I'm afraid of what honesty costs Mira. We built a quiet image because the quiet protected us. But protection can become neglect. I want to own what I did, or didn't do. And I want to listen to Mary when she speaks. Mira looked down, then up, her voice steady but quiet. I want to be heard without weaponized memory. I want my pain named, not smoothed into a lesson. If there's a frame that makes me disappear, I won't sign off on it. If we're going to edit, we need time and consent. Every voice, every boundary. Noah felt the room tilt toward him, not as judge but as listener with a microphone. I've learned our lens can hide as much as it reveals, he admitted. The pause button isn't just a tool, it's a promise. If we press it, we agree to pause the montage until we can ask, is this frame safe to share? Is it fair to the person it belongs to? Do we all consent to its presence in the story we tell together? Grace's eyes softened. Consent isn't a one-time nod. It's a rhythm we maintain, like breath. We set rules. A list of frames will open only with explicit consent. Deadlines when we check back. A clear process for anyone to veto a moment and call a pause. Liam nodded slowly, almost surprised to feel a thread of courage returning. If we respect the pause, the truth can belong to all of us. The silence stretched, then broke into a cautious agreement that felt more like a willingness to try. They looked at each other, each guarding a boundary, each willing to listen. The pause button rested between them, not yet pressed, but no longer just a prop. It had become a promise they could keep, at least for now. And the question hung in the air, unspoken yet palpable. Who decides what to leave? And how will consent be fixed as the film grows? Evening spills into the Reed living room, as the room quiets around a tired lamp. The camera sits idle on its tripod, a faint hum in the corner, and the old remote with a bright red pause button rests on the coffee table like a small, stubborn perch of mercy. Noah stands a half step away from the circle, notebook open, pen hovering as if it might fly away at the first hint of silence. Truth isn't a weapon, he says softly, almost to himself. And then into the room. It's a process. We owe something other than a clean cut. We owe control over what we reveal and when. Grace glances down at her mug, the light catching the edge of a quiet tear she's learned to hide behind a laugh. I want closeness, not a stake through the heart of our family. If we're going to tell the truth, I need to know we're steering the boat. Liam shifts in his chair, the room shrinking around the weight of years he's kept carefully stacked. I've spent nights questioning the decisions I didn't voice. If we put this on screen, I don't want someone to wake up with a new ache they didn't consent to share with the world. Mira sits at the edge of a chair, her fingers ladled, eyes wide with that guarded intelligence Noah has learned to read as a boundary line. I don't want to be seen as a problem to fix or a plot twist for someone's film. I want to choose when and how my truth becomes part of us. Noah takes a breath that tastes of old regrets and fresh resolve. Then let's create a rule, he says, the word rule lingering like a dare. An ethical pause. Before any frame that reveals a personal vulnerability makes it into the cut, we stop. We pause. We document consent. We mark what's open to discussion, and we commit to revisiting it together before it travels further. He reaches for the pause button. The room holds its breath as his finger descends, and the red symbol glows once, almost warmly. Then again, a small sun in a living room constellation. The pause becomes a tangible thing, a ritual, a promise, a line drawn in the margins. Here's how it would work, Noah continues, voice steadier. We tag frames with 3 colors: open for discussion, closed with consent, and pending. For anything sensitive, we pause, we check in. We write down a shared understanding, and we only move forward if everyone voices a clear yes. Grace nods, slow and deliberate. I want to see the notes as we go, not just the captions at the end, she says. I want to feel that my voice belongs to the final version. Liam breathes out, a sigh that seems to carry years. If we do this, we're rebuilding trust in real time. I can live with that. His eyes meet Mira's, and a wary warmth passes between them. A small, tentative bridge built in the simultaneous recognition of risk and responsibility. Mira inhales, then lets the air out with a measured calm. I'll speak for myself, not for the family's ghost. If I'm sharing something that matters, I want to decide when and how. And I want to be sure you're listening to me after you press pause. Noah's gaze shifts from face to face, a map of listening sitting between his palms. He had started with a fear that the truth would ruin what they've tried to keep intact. He ends with a decision that the film will be a process, not a verdict. A co-created space where silence is a form of care, used only when all agree it's necessary. The room settles again, but not into ease, into a clinical, intimate focus. The camera remains off, the crew almost invisible, as if the house itself holds its breath alongside them. The button gleams once more, not as temptation, but as instrument and reminder of a newer pact. The cut will be paused, the voices will be heard, and the record will travel only with consent. The question hangs in the air, heavy and ordinary at once. Who decides what stays open, and how will we document consent? The answer is not spoken out loud yet, but the weight of it feels real enough to tilt the room toward a future where truth isn't a blast radius, but a cautious, shared map. Evening spills into the Reed living room, a soft desaturation of blue and gold along the walls. The clock ticks louder here, a metronome for a family listening intently yet carefully. An empty chair sits at the dining table, opposite the sofa where the 4 of them circle an unspoken question. The camera rests on its tripod, still as if afraid to prompt what words might unleash. A small remote in Noah's hand bears a single red glow. The pause button, an undeniable symbol he cannot pretend that isn't there. No truth is a weapon, he says softly, almost to himself. Then to the circle. It's a process. Tonight we choose what we hold, and when we give each other the right to say stop. He doesn't call it a plan so much as a doorway, and the room tilts toward it. Grace shifts, the calm of years written into her silence. I want us to be honest, she admits, voice steadier than her hands. But I fear the way honesty can turn a life into a documentary frame. Every flaw cataloged, every mistake public. Her gaze flickers to Mira, then to Liam, as if asking permission to carry the truth without breaking it. Liam sits straighter, the weight of unspoken decisions pressing into his shoulders. I'm not sure what we owe the past, he finally says. But I know I don't want our future to be a lie we feed to each other to keep the room soft. The confession lands, awkward and necessary, like a key turning in a lock. Mira's eyes widen, not with accusation, but with something sharpened and real. We've all been heard only when it's convenient for the story, she says. And there's a tremor in her voice that isn't fear, but clarity. If we edit alone, we're still listening in the wrong room. Noah holds up the pause button, inviting a different kind of leverage. We'll frame a living editing agreement, he proposes, a term that sounds clinical until you watch it become a lifeline. Frames marked open only with explicit consent, pauses observed, voices named and recorded as they want to be heard. We'll document the moment someone says stop. The room quiets, and the ticking intensifies, 3 beats ahead of them. The chair remains empty, a patient witness to their negotiation. They reach for the same breath, a small, imperfect circle of trust forming around the glow of the red light. Grace nods first, almost shyly. Then we choose to be responsible with what we reveal. Liam's mouth tightens, then loosens into a rare, almost vulnerable smile. Mira rests her hand on the arm of the chair, the movement precise and deliberate. We choose to be present, she says. Not perfect. Noah feels the weight lift and tighten at once. The relief of cooperation braided with the fear of what might come next. He doesn't press for a final verdict. He offers the room the only thing it truly needs: time. The red glow hums, not loud, but present, a constant reminder of the choice that binds them. Let this moment live, Noah says, not with triumph, but with quiet resolve. If the truth must travel, let it travel with consent and care. The clock ticks. The air shifts. The question lingers, open and unanswerable, hovering like a thread from the threadbare curtain to the living room floor. Who decides what stays and what goes? Who holds the thread when the tapestry begins to unravel? The family looks to Noah, not for permission, but for partnership. He looks back, and there is a small, almost hopeful breath between them. The pause button remains lit, a stubborn beacon in the soft dusk. And as the light settles, they lean into the circle. Not to seal a decision, but to begin a dialogue they promised to keep. The room settles around them, and the scene holds still, long enough for the last question to hover, unanswered, in the space between words. Вход. Полная версия истории без сокращений.